Montana Territory, 1884. A land where the mountains scraped the sky and men measured their worth by the strength of their backs and the steadiness of their gun hands. For Ethan Wilcox, 25 years of frontier living had taught him one undeniable truth: love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. The West took more than it gave, and anyone foolish enough to open their heart would eventually find it trampled beneath the unforgiving land. The early October wind cut through Ethan's worn denim jacket as he guided his chestnut mare across the rolling grassland toward Clearwater Creek. 6 years as a ranch hand at the Double Bar had earned him calloused hands, a decent reputation, and a conviction that solitude was safer than sentiment. Tall and lean with broad shoulders and eyes the color of faded denim, Ethan had caught the attention of more than a few young women in town, but he kept his distance, offering nothing beyond a polite tip of his hat. Heard they finally found a teacher, old Pete Harrison mentioned that morning as they mended fence on the north pasture. Eastern gal, arriving on today's stage. Ethan merely grunted in response. Another tenderfoot Easterner who'd likely flee back home after one Montana winter. The school had stood empty since spring when the previous teacher had abandoned his post for the gold fields. Not that it mattered to Ethan. At 25, with no family and no land of his own, his focus remained singular: work hard, save money, and someday stake a claim to his own piece of earth where he'd answer to no one. The town of Clearwater Creek emerged on the horizon, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a single dusty main street. Ethan was tasked with collecting supplies for the ranch, a monthly errand that offered a brief diversion from the isolation of ranch life. As he approached the general store, the rumble of the stagecoach drew his attention, right on schedule. Curious townsfolk gathered as the coach rolled to a stop, dust swirling in its wake. Ethan secured his horse to the hitching post, watching with mild interest as the door swung open. The stage driver extended his hand, and delicate fingers emerged to accept his assistance. The woman who stepped down caused Ethan's breath to catch. She couldn't have been more than 22, with honey blonde hair neatly pinned beneath a modest blue bonnet. Her traveling dress, though wrinkled from the journey, was a soft lavender that complemented her fair complexion. But it was her eyes that struck him, clear and green as spring grass, meeting the stares of onlookers with neither fear nor arrogance, just quiet determination. "Miss Madeline Whitaker, I presume," Mayor Thompson bustled forward, hand extended. "Welcome to Clearwater Creek." "Thank you, Mayor." Her voice carried a gentle Eastern refinement, but something in her steady gaze suggested she wasn't as fragile as she appeared. "I'm eager to begin my duties at the school." Ethan turned away, forcing his attention back to his task. Another educated Easterner who'd wither under the harsh realities of frontier life. The territory had little use for fancy words or delicate sensibilities. Out here, survival demanded grit, not grace. And yet, as he entered the store, he found himself glancing back at her through the window, wondering what would drive a woman like that to the edge of civilization. The following Sunday, Ethan found himself at church for the first time in months. He told himself it was only because the foreman had insisted all the hands make an appearance to welcome the new schoolteacher properly. The small whitewashed building was more crowded than usual, everyone curious about the newcomer. Madeline Whitaker sat near the front, her golden hair caught in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Her dress was simpler than the one she'd arrived in, but no less becoming, a deep blue that made her appear both dignified and approachable. After the service, as the congregation mingled outside, Ethan kept to the periphery, watching as she greeted each introduction with genuine warmth. "Mr. Wilcox," the foreman's wife called, waving him over. "Come meet our new schoolteacher." Reluctantly, Ethan approached, hat clutched in his hands. Up close, Madeline Whitaker was even more striking, her features delicate but her posture resolute. "Miss Whitaker, this is Ethan Wilcox, one of the hands from the Double Bar." She offered her hand with a smile that reached her eyes. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wilcox." "Ma'am," he touched her hand briefly, calloused fingers against soft skin. "Welcome to Clearwater Creek." "Thank you. I understand school attendance has been inconsistent. I hope to change that." "Frontier's a hard place, Miss Whitaker. Most families need their children working, not studying." Something flickered in her eyes, not offense but challenge. "Education isn't a luxury, Mr. Wilcox. It's a necessity, especially in places like this." "That's so." His voice remained even, but her certainty irritated him. Books won't help a boy mend fences or a girl preserve food for winter. Perhaps not directly, but an educated mind adapts, innovates, finds better solutions. She met his gaze unflinchingly. The frontier needn't remain wild forever, Mr. Wilcox. Before he could respond, Mayor Thompson drew her away to meet other townspeople. Ethan watched her go, unsettled by her words, the frontier tamed. The very notion contradicted everything experience had taught him. The West broke things, dreams, bodies, hearts. Those who survived did so by accepting its harsh terms, not by trying to change them. 2 weeks later, Ethan found himself standing before the schoolhouse door, a bedraggled child beside him. He discovered 10-year-old Tommy Bennett huddled in the double bars barn that morning, bruised and hungry. The boy's stepfather, a mean drunk who worked a failing homestead north of town, had gone on another rampage. "She'll know what to do," Ethan had assured the trembling boy, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Still, the schoolteacher seemed the best option for a child in trouble. The single room was empty of students. Classes had ended an hour earlier, but Madeline Whitaker remained at her desk, head bent over papers. She looked up at their entrance, surprise giving way to concern as she took in Tommy's condition. "Mr. Wilcox and Tommy Bennett, isn't it?" She rose quickly, moving toward them with purpose. "What's happened?" "Found him hiding in our barn." Ethan kept his explanation brief, mindful of the boy's dignity. "Needs somewhere safe for a spell." Understanding dawned in her eyes. Without hesitation, she knelt before Tommy, her manner gentle but not pitying. "Are you hungry, Tommy?" The boy nodded, eyes downcast. "I have some bread and jam in my basket. Would you like that while Mr. Wilcox and I talk?" Once Tommy was settled with food, she led Ethan to the corner of the room. "This isn't the first time," she stated quietly. "No," Ethan was surprised by her perception. "Town knows, but nobody's done much about it. Because it's the frontier and men handle their business as they see fit." Her tone held no judgment, only a sad understanding. "Something like that." She straightened, decision made. "Tommy can stay with me tonight. I board with Mrs. Hudson and she has a spare room. Tomorrow I'll speak with the sheriff. Sheriff won't interfere in family matters unless there's blood spilled. Then I'll make him understand this is a matter of justice, not just family." Her voice remained soft but carried steel beneath. "No child deserves such treatment, frontier or otherwise." Ethan studied her, seeing beyond the pretty exterior to the courage beneath. "You're not what I expected, Miss Whitaker." "No," a small smile curved her lips. "And what did you expect, Mr. Wilcox?" "Someone who'd run at the first sign of trouble. Someone whose ideas about civilization wouldn't survive reality." "The East has troubles of its own, Mr. Wilcox. Different perhaps, but no less real." She glanced at Tommy, lowering her voice further. "I came west not to escape, but to make a difference where one is needed." Her words stayed with Ethan long after he'd left the schoolhouse. For the first time, he wondered if there might be strength in compassion, a notion contrary to everything the frontier had taught him. The incident with Tommy Bennett marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, Ethan found himself drawn to the schoolhouse with increasing frequency. First with legitimate excuses, delivering firewood the ranch had donated, fixing a broken window, then with increasingly flimsy pretexts. Madeline had indeed spoken to the sheriff, and while no arrest was made, the very public attention had temporarily curbed Mr. Bennett's behavior. More surprisingly, Tommy and his younger sister now attended school regularly, their stepfather apparently cowed by the collective scrutiny of the community. On a crisp November afternoon, Ethan arrived at the schoolhouse just as classes were dismissing. Children streamed past him, their faces brighter and more animated than he remembered frontier children being. Madeline stood in the doorway, calling reminders about assignments and wishing them well. "Mr. Wilcox," she acknowledged him with evident pleasure. "What brings you by today?" He held up a book. "Thought your students might enjoy this. Tales of the Western Explorers, found it in a trunk of the foreman's old things." Her face lit up as she accepted the volume. "How thoughtful, the children will love this." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to come in for tea? I was about to make some." The schoolroom was warm and surprisingly welcoming. Student artwork decorated the walls, and neat rows of desks faced a small blackboard. As Madeline prepared the tea on the small stove in the corner, Ethan examined the children's work, crude drawings of farms, families, and frontier life. but rendered with care and pride. "You've made a real difference here," he admitted, accepting the steaming cup she offered. "It's early yet." She settled into her chair, hands wrapped around her own cup, but they're eager to learn, every one of them. Even Josh Miller. Boy's been running wild since he could walk. She laughed, the sound warming the room further. "Especially Josh. Beneath that bravado is a brilliant mind. He solved a mathematics problem yesterday that I thought beyond him." They talked until the light began to fade, about the children, the town, their differing views of what the West could become. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself sharing thoughts he'd kept private, his dreams of his own ranch, his memories of parents lost to frontier hardship, his belief that survival required emotional isolation. "The frontier takes more than it gives," he concluded, surprised by his own openness. Madeline considered this, her green eyes thoughtful. "Perhaps it takes differently from each person. And perhaps what it gives isn't always obvious at first glance." "You truly believe that?" "I do," she smiled, a hint of mischief in her expression, "though I'm certain a hardened cowboy like yourself must find such optimism terribly naive." He found himself smiling back. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just beginning to wonder if I've been looking at things too narrowly." As winter descended on the Montana territory, Ethan's visits to the schoolhouse became regular. He began arriving early enough to help with chores, chopping wood, lighting the stove before students arrived, repairing whatever needed fixing. The ranch hands teased him mercilessly about his interest in education, but he bore their jibes with uncharacteristic good humor. Madeline, for her part, seemed to welcome his presence. Their conversations deepened, covering books she'd recommended, his knowledge of the land, and increasingly, personal hopes and fears. She told him of her comfortable but stifling life in Boston, the loss of her parents that had freed her to pursue her own path, and her belief that education could bridge the divide between East and West. One evening in December, as a snowstorm raged outside, they found themselves alone in the schoolhouse later than usual. Ethan had insisted on escorting her home, but agreed to wait until the worst of the blizzard passed. They sat before the stove, the room illuminated only by its glow and a single lantern. "You could have had an easier life," Ethan observed, watching firelight play across her features. "Teaching in Boston." "Why choose this?" "Ease isn't the same as purpose," she replied, eyes on the flames. "In Boston, I was one of hundreds of teachers. Here I can make a real difference." She looked up at him. "What about you? Why stay on someone else's ranch when you dream of your own?" "Saving takes time and," he hesitated, then admitted, "the frontier punishes dreamers." "Does it?" She leaned forward. "Or does it reward those brave enough to dream despite the hardships?" Something in her words, or perhaps the way the firelight softened her already beautiful face, broke through a barrier Ethan had maintained for years. Without conscious decision, he reached for her hand, her fingers curled around his, warm and accepting. "Madeline," he said, her given name feeling right on his lips, "you make me question everything I thought I knew." "Is that so terrible?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It should be." He moved closer, drawn by something stronger than the caution that had guided his life. "But it isn't." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the warm cocoon of the schoolhouse while winter raged outside. When they finally parted, Ethan felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside him. The frontier that had taught him to expect loss now offered unexpected possibility. The blizzard lasted 3 days, stranding everyone where they'd taken shelter. When Ethan finally returned to the double bar, he carried with him a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. The hands noticed the change immediately. "Teacher must have taught you something good," old Pete commented with a knowing grin. Ethan merely smiled and returned to his work, but his thoughts remained with Madeline. As Christmas approached, their growing attachment became known throughout Clearwater Creek. They were discreet but made no effort to hide their affection. Ethan attended church regularly now, sitting beside Madeline and joining in community activities he'd previously avoided. For her part, Madeline bloomed under his attention, her natural vivacity enhanced by happiness. The holiday celebration at the schoolhouse drew nearly everyone in town. Children performed recitations and sang carols, their parents watching with pride. Afterward, as people mingled over punch and cookies, Sheriff Davis approached Ethan with an unusual seriousness. "Got a telegram today," he said quietly. "Been asking around about that gang that's been hitting settlements north of here." He glanced toward Madeline, who was helping serve refreshments. Seems they're headed this way. Might reach Clearwater Creek within the week. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. How many? 5, maybe 6, led by a man calling himself Jackson. Vicious bunch. Already killed 3 men in Pine Top. The news spread quickly through the community. That night, as Ethan walked Madeline home, her usual cheerfulness was subdued. What will happen if they come here? She asked. Town will defend itself. Ethan kept his tone matter of fact, though concern churned inside him. Sheriff's organizing a group. I've volunteered. She stopped walking, turning to face him in the moonlit street. Of course you have. It's what needs doing. I know, she touched his face, her gloved fingers gentle against his cheek. Just promise me you'll be careful. I found something I wasn't looking for in Clearwater Creek, Ethan Wilcox. Something I'm not prepared to lose. He caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his face. I've spent years believing the frontier only takes. You've shown me it can give too. He kissed her there in the snowy street, no longer caring who might see. I won't lose that either. The gang arrived 3 days later, riding boldly into town as though they owned it. 6 rough-looking men led by a tall figure in a black coat, Jackson, presumably. Ethan and 5 other men stood with Sheriff Davis in front of the general store, rifles ready. Afternoon, gentlemen, Jackson called, reining his horse to a stop. His voice was surprisingly refined, at odds with his dangerous appearance. Seems you're expecting us. Nothing here for you, Jackson, the sheriff replied evenly. Best move on. Jackson smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. Now that's where you're wrong. This fine establishment behind you has goods we need. The bank down the street has money we want. And you fine citizens are going to step aside and let us take both. Not happening. The standoff lasted seconds that felt like hours. Then one of Jackson's men grew impatient, reaching for his gun. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Ethan took cover behind a water trough, firing deliberately. One outlaw fell, then another, but Jackson and his remaining men were skilled. A bullet grazed Ethan's arm, another struck the deputy in the leg. The townspeople retreated into buildings as the gunfight intensified. From his position, Ethan spotted movement at the schoolhouse door. Madeline stood there, ushering children inside. They must have been having extra lessons. His heart stopped as he realized Jackson had noticed too. The outlaw leader turned his horse toward the schoolhouse, a predatory intent clear in his posture. Without hesitation, Ethan abandoned his cover, running across the exposed street. Bullets kicked up dust at his feet, but he kept moving, driven by a fear greater than any concern for his own safety. He reached the schoolhouse steps just as Jackson dismounted. Stay away from them, Ethan warned, leveling his rifle. Jackson's smile widened. Well now, what have we here, a hero? He gestured toward the schoolhouse. Step aside, Cowboy. I only want to ensure the teacher and her little charges remain safely inside while my business concludes. Your business is finished, Ethan's voice was steel. The only choice you have now is whether you leave on your horse or in a pine box. The outlaw's expression hardened. I don't take orders from ranch hands. His hand moved for his gun, but Ethan was faster. His shot caught Jackson in the shoulder, spinning the man backward. Before the outlaw could recover, Ethan closed the distance between them, rifle butt striking Jackson's jaw with enough force to render him unconscious. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall and facing determined resistance from the townspeople, chose to flee. As quickly as it had begun, the violence ended, leaving the street eerily quiet except for the groans of the wounded. The schoolhouse door opened and Madeline rushed out, throwing her arms around Ethan with little regard for propriety. You're bleeding, she whispered, touching his injured arm. It's nothing. He held her close, suddenly trembling with the realization of what he might have lost. Are the children safe? Yes, all safe. She pulled back to look at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. I saw you running across the street. I've never been so frightened. Later, after the wounded had been tended, the dead removed, and Jackson and one surviving gang member locked in the jail, Ethan and Madeline stood on the boardwalk outside Mrs. Hudson's house. The setting sun painted the snow-covered street in shades of pink and gold. I always believed the frontier taught only harsh lessons, Ethan said quietly. That opening yourself to others meant risking loss. And now, Madeline's voice was soft in the gathering dusk. Now I understand there are things worth risking everything for. He took her hands in his. When I saw Jackson heading toward the schoolhouse, toward you, I realized something. The frontier doesn't just take. It gives opportunities to choose what matters most. And what matters most to you, Ethan Wilcox? His answer was simple and unequivocal. You, a future with you. Spring came early to Montana that year. As the snow melted and the first wildflowers appeared on the hillsides, Ethan Wilcox made two significant changes to his life. First, he left the double bar, using his savings to purchase a modest but promising piece of land just outside Clearwater Creek. Second, on a perfect April afternoon, he married Madeline Whitaker in the same schoolhouse where they had first truly connected. The entire town attended, crowding into the small building or gathering outside the open windows. Madeline was radiant in a cream-colored dress, her honey-blonde hair adorned with spring blossoms. Ethan, in his first-ever store-bought suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as they exchanged vows. "You've taught me what love truly means," he told her during their simple ceremony. "Not weakness, as I once believed, but the greatest strength I've ever known." Their new home took shape through the summer, a sturdy two-room cabin with a view of the mountains and room to expand. Ethan worked the land during the day while Madeline continued teaching, her students now including several adults eager to improve their reading and writing. Evenings found them on their porch, planning their future as the sun set behind the distant peaks. In September, exactly 1 year after Madeline's arrival in Clearwater Creek, they hosted a gathering at their homestead. The entire community came to celebrate not only their marriage but also the expanding school, which would soon move to a larger building with 2 classrooms. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit, Ethan found a moment alone with his wife near the edge of their property. The first stars appeared overhead as he wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently over her stomach, where their first child had just begun to grow. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked softly. "When you stepped off that stage, Coach." Madeline leaned back against him, covering his hands with hers. "I imagined making a difference, building something meaningful, but this, us, is beyond anything I dreamed possible." "The frontier has its own wisdom," Ethan reflected. "It taught me to survive alone, but you taught me to live fully, to build rather than merely endure." "Perhaps that's the true lesson of the West," she suggested. "Not that we must harden ourselves against loss, but that we can create something beautiful even in the harshest places, if we're brave enough to try." From where they stood, they could see their home, golden light spilling from its windows, and beyond it, the lights of Clearwater Creek shining in the distance. No longer just a place to survive, but a community to belong to. A place where love had proven stronger than isolation, and hope more enduring than hardship. Ethan turned Madeline gently in his arms, marveling at how completely his understanding of the frontier had transformed. "I came west believing I could only count on myself," he said, brushing a strand of honey-gold hair from her face. "You showed me the truth that we find our greatest strength in what we build together." As they walked hand in hand back toward the warmth and light of their home, Ethan Wilcox knew with certainty that the frontier had finally given him its greatest gift, not the solitude he had once prized, but a love that made even the Wild West feel like home.